Welcome to Culture Meets Crypto, a podcast that dives into the intersection of gaming, music, art, and crypto. Each week, Angela, Ali, and Evan speak with the global founders, CEOs, and thought leaders about many new online economies which are bubbling up in the metaverse. Our conversations will explore new business models with the leaders who are shaping this future.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm very, very excited that we've got Philip Rosedale today. I am Angie Dalton, CEO and founder of Signal Growth Capital, and my co-host is with me today again, Evan Castelli. Philip has been the founder of many very exciting companies, and he's the OG of the metaverse in founding Linden Labs, which made Second Life. And I will allow him to talk about that. And then we're going to go all the way from that to, we're going to travel through crypto and all things related to kind of how Second Life was built and to today, which is a long period of time. And then we want to also end with the idea of spatial audio and the importance of it. And I've already said, just in talking to you to say hello, that I just love listening to your voice through your system, because you're really honing in on an important aspect of the metaverse. But would you just start with, just kind of go way back, actually, because Second Life was so long ago and you were so prescient in this space. Can you just take us way back in terms of what actually really what were the bricks that laid the foundation of getting you excited about it?
Well, Second Life is kind of the combination, and I think a lot of these virtual worlds are, of two different things: sort of the world itself, the idea of a virtual place, and then sort of people and how they interact, form relationships, enjoy being in there, So I've always thought of it as kind of being this interesting collision of two things: simulating a world somehow, and then people. When I was a kid, I was interested in the former, simulating a world. And, for me, I wasn't as old, I'm kind of the next generation of technology people, kind of after Gates and Jobs, and their generation was the very emergence of the PC as an available device, the idea of a fast personal computer. So as a kid, I was a little bit later. So the computers were around, but what didn't exist yet was the network. And so the foundational experiences I had were experiences around being amazed by how much computers could simulate a world similar to our own. And so I was interested in things like cellular automata and, Stephen Wolfram, the famous researchers and, scientist and founder of Mathematica's work on how to simulate worlds, using digital bits. And so I had this fascination since I was a kid with the idea of kind of making a world that was some kind of a big blank canvas, but that was alive and simulated, and then letting people go into the world and make stuff and seeing what they would make. And so even things like my interest in crypto and the currency that Second Life has was a kind of a necessary component, because it seemed obvious that people would want, in many cases, to like buy and sell things from each other, and that would be a, kind of reasonable way to move stuff around in a virtual world. So my initial dreaming about it as a kid was this idea of simulating a virtual world. And also, I think I was reading all the VR fiction and dreaming at a time when there was no way to do it, dreaming about like, how could we put a headset on your face, that let you be immersed in the virtual world. So all of that stuff made me really want to do some kind of a world. And then when the internet happened, which was my generation, 1994, really,
Yep.
I was there as a kid who had been programming already for like a decade and understood networking. And so it was just like this, how could I fail? I suddenly had a global network. And so the dream of Second Life was to use that global network to somehow, create a very, very large space that went across many, many server computers, not dissimilar to, mining, today. It was something where I wanted to see how big a place could you make, which currently Second Life is the size of Los Angeles and covers, 15,000 servers or something like that. I wanted to see, how big a space could we make and how wild it would be to like let people in and see what they did. And so that was kind of the original dream as a kid that led me to Second Life.
I love it. Did you know right after you started Second Life that it was going to become the size of Los Angeles? Or like, how long did it take to, were there various iterations of it? What did it look like in the early days?
In the earliest days, it was water and rolling hills. So the very beginning of Second Life was what in technology we call the height map, which is essentially just
Mhm.
the land itself. I wanted something that was organic because I had this fascination with simulating organic processes, like the
Mm,
branching of the branches of a tree, or the way wind worked, or the way water was simulated. And so Second Life in the beginning was this very beautiful organic thing: rolling hills, water, a sun and a moon that rose and set. And so that was the beginning of it. And when people first came into Second Life, that was the experience: was you were landing in a field, basically, with water and hills and everything. And then you could buy the land and start building stuff on it. And so that was the very beginning of the experience. Even before, there weren't even avatars in the beginning of Second Life. That is to say, the idea of what people should look like as they came into this place, I didn't really have any idea. It was a much more iterative, experimental process that led to like what people look like now in Second Life and how they interact with the world.
so what did they look like? Not to get off on a tangent very early, but this is super interesting. I hadn't even thought
The
about
very,
this
you,
idea. Yeah.
the very first avatars that we experimented with were just, I wanted to only indicate where you were looking. In other words, right, when you were in first person view and you look around a 3D world, you're pointing in a direction, which is the middle of your screen. The first thing that I wanted to do, in the first avatars we had, I wish I had pictures of them, they were so funny. We made this big floating eyeball. So your presence in the world was just a big ball that was a big funny, and we made it like a kind of a flaming eyeball because we thought that'd be kind of funny, like a 57 Chevy eyeball kind of thing. And as you moved around, it would, like the Eye of Sauron, right? It would show you where the person was looking. And since that was live, the very earliest form of kind of communication was just, I'm looking over there, and you could tell I was looking over there. And a group of people, you could see who was looking at who, right? Just like we can't do correctly in Zoom. So that was the
Exactly.
first idea, was just using a visualization of where you were looking. And then the other thing was we kind of had this, Wonder Twins power beam that we still have in Second Life that comes out of your avatar, out of your avatar's hand now, and points at whatever you're clicking on. So there was where you were looking, and then
Yeah.
where you were clicking. And we wanted to convey those to people. So that was the very first avatar. Later, we had this crazy avatar that we called Primitar, that was basically this sort of Michelin man looking creature that was kind of made out of balls, metaspheres, as they call them now. And and that looked humanoid. And then by the time we launched Second Life, we had built an avatar that really is quite good, even by today's standards, where there were layers where you could put tattoos on your body, or different types of hair or clothing, the basic idea that we now all know today as an avatar.
Right.
And I think this is important, and still this is not achieved yet, which is one of the challenges of the metaverse. We had to sort of provide people with something that, especially as adults, not as kids, but as grown-ups, they would be comfortable representing themselves as, and we had to
Right.
put enough detail and the ability to be beautiful, the ability to be subtle and detailed in your appearance, the ability to wear earrings, all of these things were things we had to do as a means of getting grown-ups to come and join the virtual world. And that's still something that broadly we haven't achieved yet. The people that are using virtual worlds today are all young kids. We haven't yet gotten to the point where we have grown-ups using virtual worlds, but we're talking about it a lot. And of course, we're all hoping we're going to soon.
Yeah. I'd love to also go into the economy. One of the things I think that you and I have bonded over is this idea of organic growth and organic growth, and also the ideals around access in metaverse worlds, and the idea that I think some of what crypto has done in terms of getting a little bit off piste is actually not democratizing access. And so I would just love to hear kind of how the economy of Second Life developed in an organic way. And how big did you say? You said the size of Los Angeles. How would you quantify that? And then how did it
Yeah.
grow organically?
Yeah, well, to put it in context, so today, Second Life is still probably the largest virtual world that has grown-ups using it, that has adults using it. It's about the size of Los Angeles. It is a virtual world that spans across something like 15,000 server machines that are running all the time, like mining nodes to essentially simulate the world. And it has this big economy. The economy is about $650 million a year, which enables several thousand. I mean, it's a long tail, of course, but there are several thousand people who would call Second Life their it's their source of income in the real world. And so that $650 million economy provides jobs for thousands of people. And then it's a home for about 1 million people. So it's kind of interesting there to look at economies, right? That a few thousand people make a living kind of providing the experiences and the content for like a few 100,000 people, that are sort of living there all the time. So it's just kind of interesting, scaling factor there. How many people are the creative people, or how many people are actively making a living? Kind of everybody's creative in Second Life, but how many people are making it their livelihood versus how many people are kind of part of the experience living there?
How do people make it their livelihood? Like, what items are they selling? What services are they giving to other players?
Yeah, so if you look at that $650 million person-to-person economy, so GDP in traditional economic words, of Second Life, the largest category of stuff that people are buying and selling is avatars and accessories. So things like actually hair for your avatar, like, buying hair basically is one of the largest single categories. So hair and like jewelry and clothing taken together is probably $300 million a year, or something like half of that overall stuff. And then there's all kinds of additional things, to your question. People make things like furniture. People do non-content creation jobs like experience management. There are people who have nightclubs, for example, in Second Life, who that's their living, is to run that club, to get people to come and say play live music at their club or DJ at their club, right? In a very traditional way. There are people who do event planning. There are people who offer consulting services. There are many people that program in Second Life also, because Second Life, like Ethereum, has a language that is written for it that the simulated world runs. So you might have a pair of headphones on in Second Life that are aware of the environment or changing colors to tell you things as you walk around or whatever. So there is a programming language that people also use to make a living there, some people. But it's a lot like the real world. I mean, it's smaller than the real world, but the stuff that's going on there is pretty equivalent to what we do in our day-to-day lives here.
How, I guess, have you managed? There had to have been some management around the idea that the items are of a level that allows for entry. The barrier to entry is very low for somebody new coming into Second Life, and we've seen really the opposite in crypto. How did you manage that?
Well, there's a bunch of things. One is this idea of live collaborative editing of everything. So a lot of the virtual worlds that we've seen, or the game environments or the shared environments that people are playing around with today, there's still this idea of you need to do all your work offline, and then you need to kind of upload it into the virtual world. That's a pretty hard workflow, because you need to be an expert. You need to have Photoshop, and you need to have Maya or some other 3D, or Blender, some editor. And then you need to do all your work offline. This, by the way, is true for Unity as well. You do all your offline work in the editor, and then you upload everything. I was always a big believer in the different model, where more like Minecraft, I guess, for those who have seen that, where everything was live. You clicked on something and everybody standing there saw you editing it. So in Second Life, you can do things like building contests where people stand around in a circle. This was so much fun, and people still do it in there today. You get everybody to stand in a circle, and then you say, okay, you have 5 minutes. You need to make a grandfather clock. And you see people start magically creating these objects out of thin air and putting them together and painting them and everything, right? And in 5 minutes, you've got some grandfather clocks, and we've had contests where everybody then votes and, says which one they like the most and so on. So that idea of live collaborative building that everybody has easy access to, you click on the ground and a cube shows up, was one of the things that was key. I mean, I think going back to your earlier question, I could talk all day about all the other things we did or discovered or had to do to make Second Life really equally accessible and economically fair, as you touched on earlier. And I think, a lot of the stuff that we did around the economy was very different, as you and I have talked about before, than the stuff that has happened, with some of crypto, so we've seen a wide range of experiments, but Second Life had a very different strategy because what we were trying to do wasn't get anybody rich or have the early people get rich and talk about how cool they were or whatever. It was instead that we wanted to enable people to, on a continuing basis, make things, and if they wanted to, sell those things to each other and make money doing it. So our strategy for managing the economy was, I wouldn't say it's not 180 degrees different, but it was very different, than like what we've seen in crypto.
What about the idea of decentralization and versus centralization? How did you think about that? Did you think of it as an evolution toward decentralization? Is that a utopia or not a utopia? How do you think about this concept?
Yeah. Well, I think everybody's looked at it very black and white, as tends to happen, right? Like we kind of talk about centralized is like Facebook, and that's really bad because they're doing all the moderation and it's their world and they control everything you own or whatever, or everything you're building. We have that. And then the other one, as we say, and then there's decentralization, in which everyone is free to do whatever they want, whenever they want. And nobody controls anything, and both of those limits, both those black and white limits of centralization and decentralization, in my opinion, are pathological failures. It's easy to identify why they won't work. Facebook moderating all your content, of course, that's not going to work. You have one company that has one set of standards, and they're trying to apply that to 1 billion people all around the world whose localities and geographies and languages and interests are complete, and standards and morals are completely different. And so it can't make sense to be centralized. On the other hand, being fully decentralized means that people can cause harm to each other in unstoppable ways. I can kind of abuse you continuously, following you from decentralized place to decentralized place. There's no recourse anybody has. I can create a new account if I want to. All these things we see in crypto that are problematic. I can hide behind an anonymous address. So that's also a failure. The real world strikes a balance. All living things strike a balance between many, many extremes, right? Life exists at the edge of chaos, as they say. I love that expression. And, the real world balances us at the edge of chaos. We have a local community, that might restrict our behavior in different ways. We might belong to a homeowners association, right? In the most limited way, that subjects us to frustrating rules about how we have to live our lives. But then if we walk out into the desert, we have much more freedom. We can do whatever we want, but of course we're still attached to some level of identity with the community members we know. And then we have cities, towns and cities and states and governments that are overlapping, polycentric, as many say nowadays, which I think is a good word for that. And all of this comes together in a balance that allows people to mostly do what they want to do and get by and, participate and be creative. And I think the metaverse that we'll ultimately get to will similarly balance centralized things and decentralized. And Second Life is an example of that. It is a mix between centralized and decentralized strategies. So for example, people own neighborhoods in Second Life, and they fully as a community create their own rules in those neighborhoods, which the company has nothing to do with. You might, and people have experimented with things like political systems. So there have been like experiments in socialism that are fascinating, where people have experimented with community ownership of properties and different things like that. At the global level, though, if you're doing something like stealing money from other people, yeah, the company will get involved and provide a central governance function as it relates to that type of moderation. So there's a balance between the decentralized and the centralized. I would say, though, that Second Life is probably a bit more decentralized spiritually. It was definitely an attempt, like crypto, to largely stay out of people's way, but nevertheless, we had to do a lot of different things, going back to what you said, to make it a fair, inclusive, and open place. It wasn't just a matter of, decentralizing everything.
I mean, yeah, we talk a lot about this idea of DAOs and how, decentralized autonomous organizations make a lot of sense in the context of the future world of, we touched on it on email together, stakeholder capitalism. And by the way, thank you for sending me that. I did a reading
Great?
on that.
Yeah.
And I had been articulating it differently, but meet with the same meaning, which is this idea that the ethos of transparency in a food chain and the ethos of all of the participants in the food chain garnering value from that activity in kind of a fair way. I think is more important, or we think is more important in terms of decentralization than actually the blockchain technology. It's really ownership, control, inclusiveness, and also just delivery of value based on where that value is generated. So I think that it's interesting how full circle it feels that we might go back to a place that is like Second Life, honestly, in terms when we get to more of the not end state of crypto, but like a more steady state of crypto, because there is. I like that. I like that word polycentric. I think that you're right. That encapsulates a lot of it, because just like in nation states, there has to be, some sort of organization. With DAOs, one of our first analysts, Max, he went off to start Fiat DAO. And we talk a lot with him about the idea that the DAO structure works very well in terms of, paying people, streaming payments to people based on work they've done and all of the technology solutions that it provides. But what about managing people? What about, some hierarchies that need to exist to get things done? I mean, there's some kind of, big picture things that we need to kind of struggle with a little bit to get to that state in crypto, I think.
Absolutely. You're making me think so many things there, as you always do. But one of them is, how large should the countries be? I love that one. Perhaps you've read that book that just came out. I think it was on the carefully timed to drop on the 4th of July. And it's called basically The Network State. And
I haven't read it yet, but I am going on vacation, so I will.
You've not read it. It's a kind of a monstrous, I don't know if the right word is screed. I always forget what that word means, but it's like it's a combination of a bunch of practical thoughts about decentralization and about digital economies and digital communities. And then it's also kind of a very opinionated discussion of politics and things like that, libertarian politics and stuff. But, I think there's this interesting question, which is, right, as communities are embedded in each other, that's the polycentric idea, right? And then there's this other question of, how big should a community be? How big should a nation state be? As technology changes us, will the size of countries change? That's the one that I think that book is largely about.
This is Biology's book, right?
Yep.
I read the short summary of it. And the only thing that didn't resonate, I thought a lot of it resonated, but the only thing that didn't resonate, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, I want you to continue, is the idea of kind of a single person in charge. There seemed to be that thread.
Oh, right. That's right. That you're right. You're right. He talks about the idea of the new leader being a
The new
kind of
leader.
an influencer, and that you need a, yeah, I agree. There was a lot of stuff that did and didn't resonate for me with that as well. But as a kind of a pattern watcher, I thought the fact that, you know, a thoughtful person like that published a book so lengthy and so passionate about basically how technology is going to change community, right? That's kind of the high level way. I think that's the conversation we need to all be having right now. Like a simpler, more, you know, a more crypto focused example of it is just how many currencies should there be, right? We've created this decentralized idea that we can create coins, and we can have these coins, you know, that we use to trade things. But the fascinating question is, how many should there be, right? The idea that there should be just one global coin, you know, Bitcoin, to rule us all, in my opinion, makes little sense. It doesn't make a ton of sense at all. Monetary policy is something that logically applies to a group that is not the global group, right? This is the whole EU versus its individual nation states, right? Should the EU currency rule all these countries, right? It's a fascinating question. It's an open experiment, but certainly the answer is nuanced. It's not obvious that, you know, well, in my opinion, it's actually pretty obvious that one single coin for all inhabitants of Earth, dictating a monetary policy for that is impossible. And so we're not likely, in my opinion, to see a long-term digital currency that is a single currency for the whole world. I guess we could see that with something like Bitcoin as sort of an asset, or a, you know, a hedge or something like that. I suppose you know more about that than I do, but as in terms of it being a currency like Second Life's that enables people to have a living and live in a world together, oh, I'm quite sure that more logically attaches to a smaller group than all 7 billion of us.
What do you think crypto can learn from a regulatory perspective from Second Life?
From a regulatory
on the concept of you know, monetary policy and currency. Is there any challenges that you face that you feel are very applicable that people are really missing?
Well, I mean, gosh, where to start on that? I mean, one thing is that, you know, reflections on crypto as we've seen it so far, that I think does tie back to Second Life a little bit. One thing is that if you give people an unfettered ability to attack each other with things like Ponzi scheme type strategies, you can't. As a community, you have to do something about that. So there's this story from Second Life about 2007, I think, where there was a group that was called Ginkgo Financial. And just like we see in DeFi today, they put these ATMs up all over Second Life. And they said, deposit your money, your Linden dollars, at our ATM, and we'll pay you 8% a month on your money, or some, whatever it was. You know, it was this insane interest rate. And I remember we were scratching our heads kind of, because we always tried to make Second Life as open and, hey, you know, we're going to do a minimal amount of governance here. But I remember that was one of the times where we're like, well, this is ridiculous. You can't, the unfair advantage that the creators of the ATMs, that the financial team had compared to the suckers that were putting money into these boxes, right? It just was obvious to us that it was an unfair and unstable situation. And so that was one of the first cases where we went in and we said, folks, you know, you cannot have financial Ponzi schemes in Second Life. We will stop you. You know, you can do anything you want, but not that, you know. And so it was an example of where we stepped in. I mean, I think what crypto can learn from monetary policies is, more broadly, is this idea of, it is, I guess here's what I would say. It is possible to have a decentralized or a more open system that has a money supply that grows in proportion to productivity in the world, so that the price of the currency remains constant. I think that one of the things that Second Life can show the world is you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, I think that part of what we've done with crypto is said, we can't trust central governments to print money because they distribute it unfairly. And that is true. that is a fair statement, right? For the most part, the distribution of money that's printed by a government is going to make somebody very unhappy, right? And is appropriately oftentimes, goes really wrong, the 2008 crisis, et cetera. However, going from that and saying we need to disband all of that and we're just going to have 24 million coins and that's all there will ever be, so nobody can touch the money supply and we're all just going to work with those coins forevermore, that doesn't work either, because essentially, as of course we've seen, those coins will go up and up and up in value, and then no one will trade with them. And that's exactly what we have today. We have a non-functional, we don't have the thing that myself, I think, and many other people were dreaming of, which was a new currency, a digital currency that I could use to buy milk from somebody else. We didn't achieve that at all. So I think what Second Life demonstrated was a pretty decentralized strategy and a very different monetary policy strategy that worked in the narrow sense that it enabled specialization and trade. And that's what it still does today. So I think Second Life is proof that we can build a digital currency that we actually can use day to day as money. And it can have a monetary policy, which is not the same as a fiat currency, but is not the kind of non-policy or fixed supply that we've experimentally done with crypto.
And is that why you didn't introduce a token in the crypto sense? Because it seems like there are just countless economies in crypto that have this fixed number. You're right. I mean, it works for a few people, the first few who get in.
Exactly. And we knew, we hoped that Second Life would grow, and that, of course, the people in the future would be many more than the people in the beginning, right? That it would grow exponentially, which indeed it did for a while. And from the very beginning, we were like, well, we can't unfairly reward the 100 lucky, crazy people that got into Second Life at the very beginning. I mean, we love them. They're still a part of the community today, many of them, but we're not going to make them billionaires. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all. I kind of think it's funny, I mean, I think you and I have talked about this before, but I think that you can only choose one of an idea that's genuinely transformative and empowering, and an idea where I get rich if I got in early. You can actually only choose one of those. And it feels to me like there's a lot of people in crypto saying, I'm doing both. And it's just like, well, that's nonsense. If you're getting rich with this system because you got in early, then it's not a fair, empowering, or humanistic system at all.
Yeah.
Could you touch a little bit on, sorry, you want to go, Angie?
No, I was just going to say, I know Evan wants to switch topics, so I'm going to turn it over to Evan.
One more note on the Linden dollar. Could you talk about the distribution of the dollar, how it works when a new user joins the game, if they get like a lump sum or a certain amount of spending money, or is it more like V-Bucks where users have to buy it or earn it through tasks?
Oh, no. So the intent with Second Life, and this was true pretty much from the beginning, was that the currency would be freely tradable on multiple exchanges. We were enthusiastic about having people create services that would trade the Linden dollar for US dollars. This, of course, was a place where, especially at the time, we were very different than everybody else that was out there. But from the very beginning, the intention of the Linden dollar was that we would have a mechanism that I can describe whereby dollars were printed and given out to people. And then we would encourage and ultimately provide our own services for, which we did and do, allowing you to trade US dollars or trade euros or trade any, real currency or whatever, or Bitcoins for Linden dollars, buy and sell things from people. And then if you care to extract those Linden dollars back out of the system to, real dollars to make a living for yourself. So our intent from the very beginning was to have Second Life be exactly like a nation state with its own currency, where you could do foreign exchange to trade in and out of that currency as you liked. However, we also had the goal of having the price of that currency remain pretty stable over time. And so the trick we had was, how do we print and distribute more currency, knowing that we're going to need to do that as millions of people come in, with the price of the currency on the open market remaining steady, like the dollar against the yen or something like that, or on a good day, the dollar against the yen or the euro. So that was our strategy. The way that worked was there are two ways that new currency is distributed in Second Life. The first is just giving everybody an allowance, basically a basic income. In the earliest days of Second Life, if you just signed up, we just gave you a weekly stipend of Linden dollars. So you basically just got a basic income of our currency. Okay. So, and when we did that, we were increasing the money supply. So we were just, it'd be a bit like a block reward, I guess, in Bitcoin terms.
Got it.
The second way that we put new money into the economy, which was really interesting, was we sold it transparently on the open exchange marketplaces. Now, this is really quite interesting, and nobody else has done this. What we did was we basically gave everybody guidance in the community. So this is we gave the guidance to the community that we were going to sell new currency on the open market with the goal of selling just enough to keep the exchange rate constant over time. And we've done that for 20 years now, sold new currency on the open market. And when I say transparent, what I mean is there is one individual who is the only individual who basically, where their sales of new currency on the Forex market are de novo currency, are printed currency. And you always know how many orders that person has open. So our Fed chair was basically a person, and initially his name was Richard, who did this job long ago for the first time. He had a financial background, and his job was basically just to kind of test which way the wind was blowing. And then if he thought there needed to be more or less new currency released that day, he would print more or less. But he basically had to tell everyone what he was doing. And so there was this transparency to it that, of course, real financial markets don't have. So that was the two mechanisms: basic income and the printing and sale of new currency. So that was a benefit to the company. So there was a tension there, right? You could figure that, maybe the company is going to screw everybody and print too much currency and sell it. But the transparency around that would have made that patently obvious. If we just woke up tomorrow and sold $100,000 worth of new currency where we only sold 10,000 today or something, everybody would be like, what the heck is going on? So that's what we did. And that maintained a stable exchange rate, which from 2005 to today has been about 250 Linden dollars to $1. But if you look on our trading sites today, the Lindex, you can see what the current price is, and it moves around just like crypto prices move around. No, actually not just like, it remains fairly stable though, which is really fascinating.
That is really fascinating. And that is also, really important in terms of bringing new users in, because you can constantly know that you can join, and even, the polycentric worlds, you can join a new world knowing that you can use that currency, right? Is that?
Yep. And I think this basic idea, by the way, of a community regulating itself through printing new currency and giving it out equally to everybody, and then taxing that currency as a way of deleting it from circulation. Another subnote is there are a couple of mechanisms in Second Life where currency is deleted in a manner similar to the burning that happens, say, on Ethereum. So there are some things in Second Life where if you want to, for example, I think an example of one is if you want to upload an image to Second Life. So if you're making new avatar hair and you're putting a beautiful texture from Photoshop onto that hair or something like that, when you upload that texture, you have to pay Linden dollars to do that, and they go away. They come out of circulation. They go back to the company. So essentially, they come out of the money supply. So that is an example of something we do. But I think the most important observation is a community can manage its own currency through a combination of printing, equal distribution, and taxation. And I think that's where crypto is going to go pretty soon. I think we're going to see some really interesting experiments in that regard that are already kind of people have been talking about.
So what I'm hearing is like all the work you've done in Second Life, whether it's the Lindex, working on the economy, giving people the ability to sell goods or even just customize how they look, it's all to make that world really feel authentic, to make those experiences authentic.
And to enable trade, right? The classic thing we all say,
trade.
to enable trade. That was what we needed to do.
So how else do you think metaverses are going to evolve to really feel real? What work have you noticed, or things that you've noticed that are super important to making a metaverse, a digital world, feel really authentic?
Well, one thing is the balance between things you can pay for and laws of physics you can't break. You know, that's a really interesting one. The prototypical metaverse stuff that we're seeing today, things like, I guess, Decentraland or Sandbox or, any of the other experimental kind of blockchain-based worlds have often biased toward everything has a price and all rules can be broken if you have enough money, which is interesting. I think that creates a world that doesn't feel very real. It's odd, or I guess maybe it's a sort of for a lot of people, a kind of dystopian world, right? Where, if you piss somebody off and they have enough money, they're going to screw you, But there's another side of that, which goes back to what I was originally telling you about how I wanted to build Second Life at the outset, which was computational kind of laws of physics that you can't break. That is to say, if you have two big spheres, you can't push them into each other. They're like electrons, they're going to stay where they are. You can't force them through each other. If you walk into somebody in Second Life with your avatar, you bump into them. And if a bunch of people are standing in front of the stage, you can't push through them. The laws of physics of Second Life say you can't push through those people. And even if you've got a ton of Linden dollars, you can't push through the people. So this idea of laws of physics that make the world predictable all the time, I think that's also an important part of worlds which we will ultimately want to inhabit together. So striking a balance between money, kind of leverage, trade, power, kind of attached to money, and laws of physics of the world that everybody kind of collectively agrees can't be broken. That, I think, is really interesting and is going to have to happen in any of these worlds.
It's funny, when I first kind of thought about that question and imagined what you would say, I thought it would be a lot more about kind of what people looked like, what the settings looked like, what it sounded like. But I'd love to hear what you think about the sensations in the world as well, because I know you're an avid believer in sound playing a huge part in a realistic experience.
Yeah, from the very beginning of Second Life, and you can still try it today in Second Life. If you fly around, you hear the wind in your ears, and if you turn, if you turn, the wind kind of whistles and whips around the same way it would if you were driving a motorcycle or something in the real world. That kind of continuous background noise was something that I was very passionate about. A great example of what you're saying about how being able to kind of acoustically navigate an environment or hear things the right way is very important. And overall, I think the idea of having a shared experience where we're all having largely the same sensory experience is super important. This is something that I've written about and talked about a lot, but the kind of, I'll call it kind of the Facebookian idea that we should all be in control of our own feed. So like if I want the sun to be at noon right now and you want it to be sunset, hey, it's a free decentralized world. It's always sunset for you. It's always noon for me. That's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. It sounds good at first, but it's really bad. And the reason that it's bad is because it's causing us all to be kind of having our own hallucination. We're all seeing a world that's different now. And human beings are made to share a place together. They're made to largely be having the same experience together. And that's why people in Second Life, in comparison to some of these other systems, or in comparison broadly to social media, that's one of the reasons why people in Second Life are nice to each other, because they believe that they're in the same experience together. When you stand near somebody, when you stand near somebody's avatar with your avatar, you are both clearly, visually, and acoustically inhabiting the same space at the same time. And even when we're on Zoom right now, right? My background's different than your background. This creates a weird feeling like we're not in the same place together, And that's really important to think about. I think it matters a lot. That matters a lot more to people than we think it does. And so it's super important that we have that consistent experience. I think the other thing is, to your question, Evan, what we want to look like as avatars, especially as adults, is very rich and detailed. Like our desire to say who we are to the people around us is considerable. As mature adults, we demand a lot of that. And so I think that and kind of like things like Minecraft and more recently Facebook with their Horizons product that we all saw on TV a lot there 6 months ago. It's interesting how much people kind of don't accept that, like the cartoonish avatar is just not good enough. The Minecraft avatar, no adults hang out in social spaces with Minecraft avatars, and they never will. And in my opinion, all these pixelated things that we've got that kind of inherit from CryptoPunks or whatever, the kind of pixely avatars or voxely avatars, that's not going to work. I mean, we've tried all that with Second Life. What people want is beautiful avatars, for example. That's a requirement. They want avatars that can have, tiny tattoos or earrings or nose rings or, these things that minimally enable us to say who we are in the same way that we do in the real world.
It's so funny, Philip, because I just love speaking to you because I feel like we have kind of a shared understanding about a lot of things before we even talk about them. And back in 2018, we had Into the Metaverse on our website when we started the company. And, my analyst and I at the time challenged ourselves to define what is the metaverse, of course. And we came up with a multi-sensory, shared human understanding of authenticity,
Wow.
which you just used
Exactly.
a lot of those words.
Well said.
And to me, it was so much about behavior and sound and having, more than one sensory, kind of cylinder firing at the same time really adds to the authenticity. And so that's when, it triggered our idea at the time of like Zoom. We were zoomed into the metaverse by COVID, and maybe Zoom actually is a metaverse experience. It's not anywhere near where we're going to be. And you touched on something that I have really struggled with in terms of how to understand, which is facial expression. So I am 100% with you on auditory. Auditory can almost make up for a lot of the visual, because if it's truly authentic in terms of walking up to a group of people and it gets louder and having that kind of truly authentic auditory experience. But I think that goes a long way, but how do you think we're going to get there on the visual front?
Yeah. And let me go back and agree with you and kind of restate what you just said. I always say spatial audio is necessary, but not sufficient. So here's the way I think it works. When you know somebody well, like you and I know each other pretty well now over a few years, if I call you on the phone, we're both simulating each other's faces. I can see your face in my mind.
Yeah.
But that's because I've had a good shot at that. Evan, I haven't seen as much. And so I can't imagine what Evan's face is doing when I'm talking. And so what I think happens is people we know well, we can use degraded forms of communication with, or degraded from a sensory perspective. So you can use just audio with somebody that you know well. But if you're talking to a stranger for the first time, and everybody that works, in businesses like yours knows how this goes, right? When you're meeting somebody for the first time, there's tremendous benefit to having the facial information, right? And then getting back, so anyway, long way of saying, facial expressions and communication between humans that is nonverbal is really important. And it's particularly important when you're meeting strangers. And so that's the thing that we've got to finish with the metaverse. And finish is a big word there. I think the science problems around conveying nonverbal communication are still profound, to say the least.
Okay.
We don't even have, I'm an entrepreneur for all these years, and some things you have the R&D done, and you just need to figure how to make a big business out of it, right? In some sense, even going back to Tesla at the beginning, Tesla, they knew that you could put like 5,000 laptop batteries in the trunk of a car and electric motors on it, and it would work. So in that sense, you know what I mean? The R&D was kind of done. Tesla was an execution problem, which is, hey, somebody's got to do the hard work to figure out how to make a bunch of cars that have laptop batteries in the backseat. that work had to get actually done. But, with making adults comfortable non-verbally communicating with each other in anything other than Zoom, we are still really in the early phases, and there is still R&D we need to do. When you look at the very best facial animation tech and stuff on avatars in any kind of live system, it still just isn't good enough. I always say the experience that would tell us we were getting somewhere is, I'm at a virtual event, I'm giving a talk, and out of the corner of my eye, Angela comes into the room as an avatar. She's not talking. She's just moving and watching and maybe turning to watch me. And as soon as I see that avatar, I say, oh, that's probably Angela. I think that's Angela. We're not there yet. The information that would have to be conveyed non-verbally to me, that's what we need to define. And frankly, I've worked on it for 20 years now. And I mean, I feel as dumb as anybody else. I haven't been able to get it right either. That's a lot of the work that we did with High Fidelity, with not, nonverbal information. It's a really hard problem. And so I think that's one of these problems that we've all got these theoretical ideas around how we want to have open systems, and we want to have freedom of expression, and we want to empower creators, and we want to have currencies and all this stuff. But we don't yet have a good enough system of nonverbal communication to draw adults that are likely going to meet other adults into the world. Not yet.
Yeah, it's almost like the better the technology gets, the worse the experience feels, almost with visual. My avatar got better and better and better, and it felt creepier as it went on.
When of course that's the Uncanny Valley, statement that is really a crushing truth in this stuff. That we when we animate an increasingly photorealistic face, if we make even the tiniest mistake, it's read by others as very upsetting. And that's this trade-off that we just can't make right now. We just don't know how to get there, because we can say, well, I'll give you a very cartoonish avatar that doesn't look anything like you and doesn't give nonverbal cues the way you do. Okay, well, that'll work, but it's not of much interest to anyone.
Super interesting. So we're not quite there yet in terms of the visual, but the auditory gets better and better. And this is one of the things that we were attracted to with Discord. Back in 2020, you and I participated with ARK Invest in this kind of bus tour in the metaverse, and we were in Decentraland and Crypto Voxels and Mirage Gallery, August Rosedale's space, which was amazing. And I did feel that we had to include Discord in there for the audio until we arrived at Mirage Gallery, because your spatial audio is in there. And so I do feel that we can get pretty close to there with audio, and it almost feels like on the visual front we're going to go more, or we're going to go further into or become less and less realistic to get almost like look and feel. And I think that we've seen this in brands. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I've been thinking a lot about brands, and Evan and I have been brainstorming, and our team have been brainstorming this idea that I used to say, I want to take my Gucci bag from the holiday party to the Mario party, back to the holiday party. And I'm realizing now it's actually not the Gucci bag. There are things like, Mythical did the first collab with a luxury brand Burberry. And instead of the trench, they ended up just introducing a shark that had the look and feel of Burberry, but nothing like anything Burberry was ever in the physical world. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. And of course, there was this parallel experience of the brands getting involved in around 2006 when Second Life became really famous. And so we saw the same thing happen where.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. I mean, we started, the beginning of the curve, the beginning of the growth curve. Well, we launched Second Life in 2003 and it became famous in 2006. So there was a period there where there was a lot of people coming in. And of course, as I described earlier, the world was completely created from scratch by everybody that was coming in. So it wasn't like remixing of existing brand assets. No. It was completely, hand building of artifacts, in the world by people. So then the brands came in and so it was this interesting collision in a way. The people of Second Life were kind of like, I don't know about this. What are we going to do with brands? And I think, as you said, the most successful brands in Second Life did things just like you said about the shark, the Burberry shark, that were completely unusual and distinct creations that in some cases, had lesser attachment to the actual real world brand presence. Like I remember Adidas made shoes in Second Life, but those shoes would let you fly and they'd have rockets. And there was it wasn't like any Adidas shoe you'd ever seen. And they were successful. There were other things where integrating the brand in being an avatar rather than making like a place that you're supposed to go to, like why would you go to a brand destination, like why, you're really there to like show off and hang around with your friends and goof around, but yeah, a lot of the content that people made and the experiences they created were singular. They couldn't have been replicated in the real world. And then they were often involved with enabling people to enjoy each other, to kind of goof around. I'll give you an example that wasn't a brand, but there was a creator named Starax who is still famous in Second Life. And that person made a wand. It was a magic wand that your avatar, if you had Starax's wand, your avatar would be holding this Harry Potter wand. Mm-hmm. And what the wand did was that when you talked in those early days in Second Life, you talked with text, so again, it's like Discord, text and sometimes voice like Discord is today, but you were always talking with text. And if you typed a keyword that the wand recognized, it would make some magical weird thing happen near all of you. So if you were talking to somebody and you said Santa Claus, it would make a Santa Claus and reindeer and sled like show up in the sky above you. And then bizarrely, because the whole thing was just kind of funny, the whole Santa Claus and reindeers and sled would fall to the ground and crash and break into horrific, millions of little pieces. And everybody would just be like, what? And the idea of this wand as a kind of a performance tool, for people to just be funny, made it one of the most coveted accessories that you could buy in Second Life. And in fact, Starax's wand, and I'm going to say this today, and of course, compared to NFTs, this was yesterday, but Starax's wand was $50. And people would, and at the time it was the US equivalent. So it was 50 times 250 Linden dollars. And we all at the time were like, the idea that somebody would pay $50 for a digital asset, in a virtual world is so exciting and so amazing. And, again, and everybody would like, all I want for Christmas is a Starax's wand. And of course, as as we've talked about before, Second Life, basically everything in Second Life is an NFT. That's definitely a good idea that made sense in Second Life and makes sense now, so that the objects in Second Life are essentially marked with who created them, who presently owns them, and then what the rights are to a future owner, which, by the way, is something that NFTs don't do. So we actually incorporated Creative Commons and rules about intellectual property also into the NFT, which was really cool. So you can click on something and see, for example, whether you can make extra copies of it once you buy it, things like that.
I'm so glad you touched on that, because that was something that I forgot to ask, but is so important and something that we're struggling with now with NFTs. Like you said, property rights was the original kind of killer app that I was excited about, and the rights don't travel.
The rights don't travel. Isn't that great? I mean, it's one of these, not great, but it's one of these kind of unintended consequences, right? Like, yeah, having the ability to trade something doesn't give you ownership of the IP, but it should. It needs to. And so in Second Life, it did. So in Second Life, we basically said, look, you're in our space. The rules of the intellectual property are embedded in these objects, so you can clearly see them and decide what you want to do. And you got to live by them. The code is going to make you live by them. And, if necessary, people would sue each other and stuff in Second Life. They had a system to fall back on, where by comparison with NFTs, there's essentially no rules about that. There's no claim on intellectual property granted, right, by a CryptoPunk or whatever.
On those notes of kind of IP management in the metaverse and also visual and audio communication, what do you think the next kind of big R&D challenges are? Do you think those are some of the largest ones, or do you think more ones are coming up, more challenges that people aren't really thinking about?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm sure there are science problems. I'm sure there's R&D problems that we'll run into. I do think that the problems are probably more like um, establishing the social contract, right? Like it's less of a
Mhm.
technology problem and more of a like, hey, how are we all going to
Behavior
agree
and
this works? Yeah, behavior. So
mhm.
I think we need a use case that really empowers people, first of all, for people to even argue about, right? Like we need some sort of really vibrant trade going on in the metaverse where people can start debating what the IP regime should be. I don't
Hmm.
want to be a jerk. There's probably NFT people or DAO people that would, come at me and be angry about what I'm about to say, but I just don't see that yet. Like we're dreaming about
Right.
it,
Hmm.
but
Mhm.
you and I, we don't like well, we might own NFTs, but we don't use or trade or present them routinely in the metaverse in a way that would
Mhm.
then beg these questions and force us to form the right kind of social contract. So I think that the
Mhm.
technology, to your question, Evan, I think the technology is pretty straightforward around executing on that. But the question is, what is the user story that gets us down that road?
That
And
is
by the way,
so interesting.
there's still things in
Yeah.
Second Life that are problematic. I mean, even with Second Life's, almost $1 billion a year economy, you know, we've never resolved IP issues around more nuanced things like copyright laws in different countries. I
Hmm.
mean, basically, you've got this problem that, what if people from two different countries sue each other over copyright law in the metaverse? Well, which country's copyright law should prevail? You can't have both if they're inconsistent. And so again, this idea of establishing a metaverse kind of social contract or a metaverse form of law or a metaverse judiciary is something that I think still has to happen.
Mm.
And I think ultimately will.
Yeah. What you just said made me think of a new idea that we should really dig into, which is this idea that in crypto so far we've seen optimization for profitability or optimization around simply, the profit that one gets from trading. Whereas in a real world use case, people optimize for many things, status, position,
Right,
long
right.
term strategy versus short term. There's so many different aspects that we should start watching as kind of factors to basically use as guideposts to see if we're actually getting to a real metaverse economy.
Yeah, like social cohesion and community formation has been an interesting thing that has been interesting to watch around crypto and around
Yep.
Discord
Yep.
and NFTs. Like one of the things that I'm always struck by, I'm sure you are too, but I'm always struck by this yin and yang that like at the bottom, crypto is kind of this horrific dark forest, right? Where everyone is screwing everyone as much as they can all the time, right? And we're
Mhm.
stealing money from each other and the bridges are getting hacked and blah, blah, blah. So it has this kind of terrifyingly lawless and, as you say, kind of capitalist, making money or stealing money oriented focus at the bottom. And then the counterbalance to that has been the wonderful communities that have been forming in these
Mhm.
smaller groups, right?
Mhm.
It's just amazing.
Mhm.
Somebody who had purchased an NFT from Mirage Gallery from August's project had lost it the other day. And of course, you've heard this story so many times. And somebody found it. I guess I don't even know the right terms here, August would, but somebody had found it on one of the like gray markets or black markets that's not OpenSea, right? Where people dump stolen goods, right? And that
Mhm.
person bought it for very cheap and just gave it back to August to give back to the person who it turns out I knew who had bought it, and so it was this
Mhm.
wonderful, you know, friendly example of people taking care of each other in crypto. But I think it's interesting because it's almost that in some sense you've got this teeter-totter, the strong community formation is almost driven by the terrifyingly lawless nature of the
Mhm.
underlying system. I think that's just fascinating.
Yeah, I think that there's this, the purest libertarians have definitely influenced the kind of the ethos or the the original, the dark side of what you talked about, but also, the positive side, which is the transparency that it brings, says that, we're all in this together, and we can see that,
Yeah,
so
I
it's
mean,
interesting. There's kind of a dichotomy there that I
yeah.
think the libertarian ethos has brought, both
Yeah,
positive
and
and negative.
maybe where we're all going is, and I feel like as with respect to something like censorship, there's a reasonable argument to be made about this, which is at the bottom of the system, you don't want to have anybody in control because, yeah, you'd get pathological failures associated with that down the road. So if you could censor the most raw form of message exchange or of money exchange or whatever, that is probably, I would say, fundamentally problematic. I would say that without being a libertarian. I would agree with the most libertarian perspective that yeah, that's not okay. But then I think as you build these layers on top of that low level, before you can get to a stable community or any kind of world we'd want to live in, maybe you start with these very kind of libertarian systems at the bottom, but then on top of that, you build all these community rules and moral standards and a social contract and polycentric governance and stuff. So, you are beholden to many different people, not nobody, in fact, to many different groups that you're a part of. I think probably maybe that's where we get next. Maybe that's a good outcome. We start with this unfettered low-level system, and then we build a bunch of social structure on top of that. Maybe that's what we'll see.
Yeah. I think that we work closely with the Web3 Foundation, and Gavin Wood is just so inspirational to me in terms of the way he thinks about how this third version of the internet will evolve. And he's constantly saying, less trust, more truth. And I think that the less trust, because you don't need to trust that the news is real when you can click into all the sources, when you have that truth as a given, so that transparency, I think, and the idea that you don't have to trust that somebody else is delivering something to you in a way that is not obfuscating. This is one reason why we're really excited about getting away from advertising, because it's a human conflict of interest, it feels like, between the creator and the consumer. And so the closer we get to this world where we can click into truth, I think the more positive kind of this original idea will evolve.
I'd never thought about it that way, what you're saying, that for example, advertising always takes us away from truthfulness. I think that's a really good point. As you know, I've been hopefully an effective, so much as I've been able to reach people, proponent of the problem you just stated, which is that as these digital worlds become highly immersive and real, we cannot do advertising in them, not in the ways that we advertise today, where there's and of course, by advertising, I mean surveillance-based targeted advertising, not advertising in the sense of like, can I put a sign on my wall? And you're right. Along with all the other criticisms and dangers of the market and economics around advertising, there's that idea that if your fundamental exchange is to convince people to buy things, you're going to lie.
You're going to at least obfuscate, right?
Yep.
It's just a conflict of interest that people don't realize is happening.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, Philip, this has been amazing as always. Thank you so much for taking the time again to join us. You were our first interview, but we did it in Decentraland, and it was amazing, but we had to pair it with Zoom and Discord and all these other things. And now we're trying to just stick with one application, and hopefully, let's say in 5 years' time, you'll be the first interview that we do in the new space.
I'm flattered. I look forward to that, and I hope we get there.
That you will probably create.
Yeah, gosh, I hope so. I know. You're right. The moment where we can have this conversation there, wherever there is, and feel great, and enjoy each other, and the people watching can enjoy us as much, that'll be the moment when we know we've made it. That's great. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thank you so much, Philip. Evan, we've had so many conversations with Philip in the past, but this was such a great conversation. It crystallized for me really why Second Life has been so durable and what crypto can learn from this first metaverse world. He pointed out that we can't have spaces that are truly empowering to many, many people and at the same time allow people who get in early to get rich quick. The reason these two are incompatible is because in the get rich quick case, wealth inequality is almost built in as part of the design. So it doesn't really work with all of these ideas around democratization of online worlds, that we're really excited about. So, if the future of online is all about community and collaboration, as we believe it is, there won't be a small, finite number of people who will hold the bulk of the wealth.
And Second Life has really been working on this to find that balance and succeed in finding that balance for nearly 2 decades. Now they're home to, I think, 40,000 monthly active users of self-expressive people who all are participating on this equal playing field. And on that scale, Philip mentioned that the GDP of Second Life is $650 million, which is equivalent to the city of LA, and it takes place on 15,000 servers around the world. So, like I said, everyone in that world has access to the same tools, which allow for what Philip calls live collaborative editing, which is the opposite of basically doing work offline and uploading it later. It means that people are coding items and experiences, they're making cosmetic in-game hair pieces or jewelry, and they're participating in a real kind of mirror of our world.
Yeah, they're doing it in such an authentic way. That's something that we agree 100% with Philip on. He kept going back to this idea that the world needs to feel real. And we, describe the metaverse as multi-sensory, human, shared understanding of authenticity. Not in this podcast, but in a separate conversation with him, he added persistent to our list, which we totally agree with. So, Evan, I really hope we get to do another episode with Philip, hopefully next year when we're celebrating the 20-year anniversary of Second Life.
Absolutely.